So today I want to do something a little bit different, and rather than talk about the state of the market, I want to talk about something that we actually have control of, which is how to invest in property. Now, all the time this year, I've had people go, why would you be buying property right now? You're mad to be buying. The market's all over the place. And I agree with that. But there's one thing that is certain in an uncertain market, in a chaotic market, and that is opportunity. And if you know how to invest correctly, there is so much opportunity now. I believe firmly we are in a period of accumulation for the next 18 months to 2 years. We're probably not going to see again for the next 15 to 20. So in this video, I want to talk about what not to do in 2024 to stop yourself getting burnt in what is a chaotic market. But I also want to talk about what I believe are the top 3 models for you to be investing into 2024. So welcome to the new subscribers. If you've not joined me before, usually we talk about market data, look at what's going on in the property market and the economy to have sort of a forward-looking crystal ball, if you like, as to what's going to be happening in the property market and the economy in general over the next 6 to 12 months. Today, as I said, we're doing something different. So welcome back to the regular viewers. This is a little bit different, and it's specifically for people who are looking to invest in property in 2024. So as we go through, please put your comments in. I will go through what I believe are the models to avoid and the models to invest in, and then we'll have a chat about it at the end. And the other thing is I want to put a caveat on this, that everything I'm going to talk about are generic models, okay? Anybody can make anything work in the right circumstances. So just because I'm going to say this is not a great model for 2024 doesn't mean somebody in the right circumstances, the right scenario can't make it work. I'm just talking more generically as models. They're not going to work. So before we go into it, as we're live, please give me a thumbs up if you can hear and see me, and find something to type in the comments box, just so I know that everybody is here. And I know we're still in this sort of period between Christmas and New Year, which is a funny period, which is why I want to do this, because those who are thinking strategically, who are thinking about how to invest as we go into 2024, I want to help you with that strategic thinking, and just maybe it might point your direction as we go forward. But before I do that, I would like to ask for 30 seconds of your time to help explain why I do this channel and how you can help me grow so I can do more things like this and help more people strategically with their property business. So I'll hand over to my past self for 30 seconds before we crack on with model number 1. For those of you who are regulars, you'll know that I'm fascinated by data. And when I look at the channel stats, I can see that just under 65% of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed to the channel. Now, I do know this stat is actually way above the average for YouTube and shows the power of the community that we're building here. But I want to do better, and I'd like to make a deal with you. I've got a vision to empower as many people as possible on this planet to take ownership of their futures using income producing assets to reclaim your time, freedom and choice. And if you can just hit that subscribe button, I'll work tirelessly to grow this channel, make it better and better for you so we can fulfill that vision together. I cannot tell you how much it helps. As the channel gets bigger, I can put more resources behind it, improve the production, the content, and ultimately the value that I give to you. So if you could do me that small favor and hit that subscribe button now, as well as the like button on this video, it would mean so much to me as we continue to grow this community together. It's the only favor I'll ever ask you. Thank you, and let's get back to the episode. Okay, I know you can find that like button, hit it up, let's get going. So how not to invest in 2024. I want to talk generically 2 concepts that I need you to avoid. Okay, so as property investors, we do need to understand what's going on in the market, and regardless of what goes on with the economy, regardless of what goes on with average property prices, it is unlikely we're going to be going back to the era of cheap debt anytime soon. Okay, and therefore we need to understand how to invest in a persistently higher interest rate environment to one that we've been operating in for the last 15 years. So there's 2 concepts I want you to focus on, okay, or models that I need you to avoid. And that is firstly something that you cannot add any value to, okay? And when I say value, there are about 7 ways that I teach my clients how to add value, probably more than that, actually, probably 9 to 11 different mechanisms. Most people think you're going to add value to a property by doing a refurb to it or something like that. That is the most difficult way to add value. But however we do it, you have to be able to add value to a property. So as we're in this uncertain market, my belief is we're going to see nominal house prices continue to drop in a shallow way through 2024. So if we're not able to add any value, then if you're buying in the next 6 to 12 months, you could well be in negative equity fairly soon. And we need to avoid that for obvious reasons. Now, if we can buy with a mechanism that allows us to add 20, 25, 30% of forced value appreciation to a property, then that means if the market goes down in the short term, 2%, 5%, 10%, we've still got equity uplift, okay? And when it goes up again, the market, which it will do because the property markets are cyclical, that is going to go back up. So the first thing we need to understand is not to be able to drop or not drop into negative equity, because that is a bad place to be. And the second concept I want you to hold on to is the ability to create cash flow. So we need to avoid models that are not going to give us any specific cash flow. And when I say cash flow, I mean cash flow way in excess of leveraged mortgage products. So I do a lot of larger scale property investing with commercial products, which right now we're getting offered probably 8% on a commercial product, which is way different to the sort of 2.5%, 3% that we were operating just 2 years ago. So if you're not able to generate cash flow, you're not going to be able to service any debt you have. If you don't service debt, then that asset actually becomes a liability. So with this persistently high interest rates that I think we're now going to be in, my suspicion is we're going to be stabilizing probably in the sort of 3.5% to 4% range as they start coming down. We need to look at models that are going to give us that cash flow. And the other thing to sort of take away from this is, as well as cash flowing properties, we need to look at cash flowing models. So very often I speak to people on strategy calls. I'm like, what do you want to do? They say, I want to do a large commercial conversion. I want to start doing new build developments. And when I talk to them about what their income is, they're like, they have no income, right? They're living off savings. Now, the problem with models like developments is you're going to be working for a long time with nothing. And then at the hope that at the end of that 12, 18, maybe even 24-month development, you're going to get a big chunk of cash. But if you can't survive, if you can't live and you have no income in the meantime, it creates a lot of difficulty in your life. So those are the first two concepts that I want you to think about. Now, let's look at the individual models. So I had an ad running on Facebook for quite a long time talking about the death of buy-to-let. And for me, buy-to-let is that traditional way of investing in property where you go and buy a single let, maybe a 2-bed, 3-bed, family home with a 25% deposit, 75% mortgage, and put a tenant in. That's the traditional hands-free investment model, okay? That just does not work in the current market. And by the way, I'm not saying you cannot make money doing it. I'm just saying generically, as a way of creating cash flow and value add, we're not going to be doing it, because unless we can force that value appreciation, okay, very difficult to do. And in single let, so I say family houses, we're still, even though the market is contracted through 2023 a little bit, and we're expecting probably some minor nominal house drops in 2024, just by buying and holding, we're not going to be able to force that value appreciation. Sellers are still asking, I would say, a lot for family houses. We are historically still at almost peak in terms of housing prices. So when you look at price to earnings ratio, housing is still expensive. So we're starting from a level that's already expensive, even if they are coming down. If we're buying stuff like this, the chances are the market's going to take us into negative equity. The other thing with single lets, if we're buying with any sort of leverage, then we're going to have a massive erosion on cash flow. What I want to do is talk through, this is one of the deal analyzers I use, a very basic sort of 80-20 deal analyzer. And I want to show what I mean about this sort of cash flow. So I'm going to use a very basic example of a standard sort of 2-3 bed property in some of my investment areas. You might be able to pick it up for, 100 grand, put 20 grand into a refurb. We've got some fees in there, and let's just say it revalues at 140. Monthly rent is £900 a month. Management fee 10%. Let's say we're lucky enough to be able to buy it in cash, and then we get a 75% mortgage. And let's say I've got no idea what buy-to-let mortgages are, by the way, at the moment in terms of percentage-wise. So I'm just going to put 5% in there. And see what that comes out with as a deal analyzer. So looking at this, it's not looking too bad in terms of we're only going to leave, because we've added some value, not a huge amount, we've added some value. We can refinance and we're just going to leave 17,500 in. But that's still 17,500. We're going to get a 25% return on that 17,000, but that just gives us a monthly cash flow of £368, which might sound like a decent amount of cash flow, but don't forget, this is before any voids, any maintenance, right? Any other costs, any tenants not paying. And most importantly, this is before any sort of tax that we're going to be hit with. So if you are buying something like this in your personal name, okay, £360 a month turns into just over £4,000 a year. if you are a higher rate taxpayer, Section 24 means the interest payments we're going to be making, we cannot offset those against our profits. There is a 20% allowance for basic rate taxpayers, but we're still going to be paying a huge percentage of this on our tax returns, and that's going to erode it significantly. So we need a lot of single lets to have any sort of meaningful income, which is why I believe that as a short to medium term play right now, the single let market is extremely difficult to actually make work and cash flow. So that's model number one, is single lets. The second model is flips. And again, I want to caveat here that I'm not saying you cannot make money from flips in 2024. There will be people who make money with flips in 2024, people who have negotiated and bought aggressively below the value and are probably doing it in cash. Now, the majority of people are not lucky enough or fortunate enough to be able to flip properties in cash. And for the majority of us, if we are using any sort of finance to buy and flip properties, you're adding a huge amount of uncertainty into that process. We have a slow market, and I know a lot of people who are professionals at this, and they're selling properties at the moment, they're sticking on the market. And if we have properties that are sticking on the market, and if you look at the Rightmove thing, you can see that over the last year or so, average property sale time has almost doubled from sort of 30 odd days to 60 odd days. If you're flipping, you're going to be at the top end of the market. It could take a long time to sell. And if you've got high carrying costs with higher interest rates, that's going to erode your profit margin significantly. And for me, it means that's risk. And the first thing I always look at doing is how do we mitigate risk? So until the market is bottoming out, for me, I wouldn't be looking at flips. And so 2024, there's not enough data at the moment to understand if we're going to be bottoming out or not in nominal terms. When we do, that would change my mind over something like flips. But for now, as we go into it, there's too much risk to sort of consider for that. Now, model number three of what not to invest in 2024, and I know this is going to be fairly controversial for people, is something I call the non-specific serviced accommodation. Right now, I know in the property investment community, I'm just going to go up here a minute. I know that for property investors, serviced accommodation, short-term lets are very, very hot right now. A lot of people are buying serviced accommodation and short-term lets for the main reason that they're going to improve your cash flow. So if you're not familiar with short-term accommodation, rather than putting a long-term tenant in on an AST and a short-hold tenancy, you're going to be putting guests in or contractors or travelers on a nightly rate. Okay, it's called an ADR, average day rate. And because that average day rate is going to be much higher than an AST, we should be able to double, even triple our cash flow from a serviced accommodation unit. So seems great at the moment, right? And don't get me wrong, I love the model of short-term lets, but here's why I'm not keen on these NSSAs, these non-specific serviced accommodation units. And by that I mean just a normal house, a normal property, a normal flat, which you buy and then stick on Airbnb. So you see it all the time. People are going to buy flats in blocks, right? Or they buy a 2-3 bed house and convert it into a contractor's sort of service accommodation unit. And there is a massive rush of people into that market right now. So what happens when there's a rush of people into the market? We hit a saturation point. If anybody tracks data and looks at reports on things like AirDNA, we can see that we're now starting to hit a tipping point in terms of the supply-demand curve for short-term accommodation in the UK. So for the last few years, there's been a definite undersupply and over-demand as we've picked up from COVID. But we're now balancing that out. And I would say probably 6 months ago, we're in equilibrium. So any more units coming on are now starting to make the supply-demand curve the wrong way round. So there's going to be more supply than demand. And that leads to a saturation. Now, saturation does not mean that people do not want short-term lets. It does not mean that demand falls off a cliff. The demand will stay as it is. What it means is that the lowest quality, the lowest quality units will have less bookings, and it's the higher quality units that are going to clean up. So when I saw this happen in the HMO market, probably 2013, 2014, sort of 3-4 years after I started investing in property, and it almost happened overnight. I remember it. HMOs are extremely hot, and we had a Christmas period, and everybody came back over Christmas, and then it was really difficult to rent out rooms. And it was really difficult to rent out rooms because there was a massive influx of people both buying properties and turning them into HMOs, and also going into the rent-to-rent market, which is effectively where you rent a property off a landlord, then sublet the rooms on a room-by-room basis. And that created a big supply-demand imbalance. So the lowest quality units all of a sudden became very difficult to let out. And I suspect something similar will happen in the short-term let market in 2024 as we hit that tipping point. The other really important thing for me for 2024 is we're seeing this government consultation right now on regulations and legislation around short-term accommodation. So I suspect we will see some form of licensing come in, probably some form of planning. I suspect permitted development, where they're talking about a C3, which is residential, to C5, which will be, a small service accommodation unit, much like we have C3 to C4, which is residential to HMO, will be permitted development. But permitted development can be got around by councils putting something called Article 4 on, which is basically you've got to now apply for planning. So I suspect there'll be areas where properties will need to apply for planning, but will fall under a much broader legislative and regulative infrastructure. And if you have non-specific serviced accommodation units, you may be caught out by these changes, or you might have to put a lot of extra money in to bring them up to what you need to actually run them. The flip side of that is what I call specific service accommodation units, i.e. things you are buying and converting specifically for the use of short-term lets. And for me, that's things like blocks of flats, apart hotels, where we're buying them, we're getting them up to scratch, getting them up to spec, future-proofing them with alarm systems. You'll see in October, there was a big thing that came out on fire regulations and service accommodation, access systems, planning, for example. So all the boxes are ticked, and you have a very high quality unit that is future proofed. Okay, and I'll talk about that in a sec. So for me, those are my 3 models that I would be avoiding in 2024. So if that's what we need to avoid, what should we actually be investing in 2024? Okay. If the 2 things we had to avoid were things we could not add value to and things we could not cash flow, we just need to flip-flop that. So we need to think about how can we buy things that we can force capital appreciation on, okay? Over the last 40 years, we've effectively seen a passive gains through most asset classes, and that's with the global decline of interest rates from pretty much 70s until, basically last year. We've seen global interest rates go down, which means there's been a lot of passive gains as asset prices have gone up because of that. I suspect we're not going to see those passive gains the same as they were in the short to medium term. So the first thing we need to be able to do is we need to be able to force value appreciation, which means we need to find things and have a toolkit of mechanisms we can use to force value appreciation. Again, I want you to think that, I don't want you to think, I want to say that the most difficult thing to do, right, to force value appreciation is to buy something run down and renovate it, or get planning and build something, all these sort of things, right? There's really much easier mechanisms we can use, and I'll share some of those today that we can use to force value appreciation. And then the second thing is we need to look at things for huge cash flow. And when I say huge cash flow, I want to caveat the difference between cash flow and return on capital employed. So I'm talking about a huge return on your money, okay, in terms of percentages. Because if we've got high interest rates, if we can get a huge return on capital, then that's not necessarily in absolute terms, but I want absolute terms and huge return on capital, because we could have a massive return on capital. Let's say you could have 200% return on capital, but you're only getting like a couple of pounds a month because you've got nothing in there in the first place. That is not very future-proof. So we need a nominal amount, so a big margin for cash flow, and a huge return on capital, if that makes sense. So I want to demonstrate to you what I mean. I'm going to go through what I believe are the 3 main things that I am looking to do in 2024 as we go into the new year. So the first of these are what I call property unicorns. When I'm looking for property, pretty much I'm solely looking for what I call a property unicorn. Okay, and here's my definition of a property unicorn. 1, we need to be able to add at least £100,000 worth of value to it in one deal. Second is the gross cash flow needs to be at least £3,000 a month from it. And the third thing, and this is like the cherry on top, is no planning required to go through that. And the reason I say no planning required is because as soon as you go into the planning system, you're going to have loads of additional costs and you're going to have loads of unknowns, right? There's going to be things out of your control that are going to happen. You're going to have to bring architects in. You're going to have to start probably, maybe even negotiating, going to appeals, all that sort of stuff. If we can do things without having to go through the planning system, that is so much easier. And I say that from bitter experience. So what is a property unicorn? Here are the sort of property types that you can find that are unicorns. Mixed use buildings, so things with commercial and either offices above, so sort of, or storage above, And the reason I say that is because we don't need to go through the planning system. We can leverage something called permitted development, which is a much simpler way of doing that, or things that are already separated into flats. Maybe they're distressed flats, or they've got sort of title issues, or things that we can fix without even having to do any particular work to it or split it up ourselves. That's way easier. Large HMOs, guest houses, care homes, B&Bs are things that are on my radar. Farm complexes are definitely something that are on my radar into 2024. You can see these are slightly larger property deals. Now, I don't want you to get intimidated by that, because we'll talk about number two in a minute. So if these sort of big deals are a bit sort of scary, which they shouldn't be, by the way, to get started, because I know people who will be spending $500,000 plus on a single let in various parts of the country. You might be spending 500 grand on a flat in London or something like that. We can buy these property unicorns for significantly below that in the right areas. And it doesn't just have to be really far up north. We could be down on the south coast. I've got a client of mine who negotiated buying a property that was a commercial premises on the ground floor, 2 flats above, was planning for a 3rd flat for just a shade under over 300,000 on the south coast of the UK. So these things are out there. I want to give you an example. So this is one that we're just finishing off, that I'm just finishing off at the moment, one we bought in 2023. And this is in Chester. You can see it was on the market for £450,000. And after some negotiation, this is through sort of various systems that I teach my Property Cashflow Accelerator clients, how to negotiate correctly and how to unlock that value. I bought that for £345,000. So we managed to buy it for over £100,000 less than it was originally advertised for. And the property itself, if I just go and get the drawing tool out, this one here, you can see it's split into 3 floors where we've got 1 retail unit on the ground floor. Then we've got 2 flats there and 2 flats there on the top floor. It actually goes back a fairly decent amount back. Now, although there's work to do, there was some distress in it. The main reason to get that purchase price of $345,000 was because there were lease or tenancy issues in there. There were old tenants on very long tenancies, very low rent, which put people off. And also this restaurant here, Taste of India, had been vacant for 5 years, but needed a full strip out. So nobody wanted to rent it out because they didn't want to spend the money on stripping it out, which, by the way, only cost like £10,000. So not a huge amount. So we managed to get it for $345,000. This is some of the pictures of what it looked like on the inside when we bought it. So you can see we've got standard stuff here of beautiful building, right, but completely neglected. And this is where the previous landlord had put in some water pipes and just gone through all the period features and plaster, and hadn't done any making good. And there's some interesting color schemes going on in the staircase, and that was one of the flats, which is looking fairly grotty. And we've been just doing cosmetic on this. We actually just got this picture back from my builder few days before Christmas. We just finished the decorating in the hallway staircase area, which is now looking beautiful, right? So we put period features, we put period paint, but it's only cosmetic. This entire staircase area for the carpet, for the decorating, for the chandeliers, for all of that sort of stuff has cost me less than £5,000 to transfer one to the other, which is more than some people, less than some people will spend on an architect just trying to put planning in for something. So this is now 4 flats which we're going to be operating as short-term lets. 2 of them one of them is about to hit the market, another one will be done soon. And if I sort of go through and look at the figures of this, and I want to show you the difference in terms of the cash flow. If we go data entry, I bought this for £345,000. The refurb will be in for $50,000. Again, that's to strip out and white box the commercial. That's to do 2 of the 4 flats. And the roof, there's some external stuff, but it's all cosmetic and maintenance rather than anything. Stamp duty was extremely low because we used multiple dwellings relief. Legal fees, I think we spent $1,500 on the conveyancing. Now, the revalue, we're just getting the revalue through at the moment. We're expecting it between $550 and $600. So I'm going to go conservative and use $550,000 on it. And the rent, I'm going to use the single let figures. So if we've got 4 properties at 700, it's 2,800 a month times 12. The flats just with single lets would be 33,600 a year. And then we've just agreed heads of terms on the restaurant at 25,000 a year. And they're doing the full fit out. So the rent is 58,600 a year. And if I divide that by 12, that's 4,800 £183 a month. I don't actually manage this because commercial is kind of self-managed, and for the flats we're actually doing service accommodation, so it'll be significantly more than the 700. We bought it in cash, so I always do this in cash if I can. Loan to value, we're going to get 70% loan to value. Interest rate is going to be a lot higher. I said we've been offered 8% from Lloyd's. The mortgage fee will be about 1% of that. So let me put that in. And then the valuation fee, we spent £2,000, although that was valuing a portfolio, so I'm going to put £1,000 for the valuation fee. If we look at the deal analysis here, you can see that our return on capital employed after the refinance is, don't worry about the negative, just the way my deal analyzer works, 170%. So we'll be getting 170% a year return on the money we're leaving in after the refinance, which is 16,000. Okay, so a lot of people go, 170% sounds ridiculous, right? Most people are looking for 5, 6, 7, 8%. So 170% sounds crazy. And then after finance at 8%, it's still going to be giving us a monthly net cash flow of 2,279. Now, look, there are some other things that come out of that. There's going to be landlord's electricity supply, as an example. There will be insurance, buildings insurance will come out of that, but they're tiny little amounts. So that will be netting, even at an 8% interest rate, where we've leveraged and pulled out pretty much everything. So we're going to pull out everything other than £16,000 of our original finance on a 70% loan to value product. And it's still net cash flowing over £2,000 a month with an 8% interest rate. So that's an example of a property unicorn and what you can do with a property unicorn. Not a difficult project to do, obviously more difficult to find and negotiate and structure those deals. So that's model number one for you about what you should be investing in 2024. Model number two, I call Sparkles. Now, Sparkles, if you don't know, is a baby unicorn. So if these larger projects sound a bit intimidating for you to get started with, and you want to do sort of a more smaller project that uses the same methodology, but is just smaller in scale, then I recommend something like a Sparkle. So these are basically smaller unicorns or baby unicorns. I want to give you an example again of one in my portfolio. This is actually one I bought quite a few years ago now. For me, a Sparkle is generally a 2-unit property. It could be a residential, or it could be a mixed use, or it could just be commercial, where you've got either commercial on the downstairs, flat above, or you've got flat. Okay, nice and simple, really easy to manage. This particular one is in Ellesmere Port, and it's a cafe below, and it's a 1-bed flat above. Now, I bought this property, as you can see here, in December 2015 for £50,000. I'm not saying you'd necessarily be able to buy it for 50 grand now. September 2005, it had last sold for £100,000. So in 10 years, that owner effectively lost £50,000 on that property. It was a distressed sale. There was no work that I needed to do with it. It was actually completely moving condition. It still had all the fridges in the cafe. And that was through something I found that through something called the Deal Machine, which where I set up sourcing pipelines to find properties with this motivation. I'd actually been negotiating on that for almost a year before we got it locked in at that price point. You can see, by the way, just if there's of interest, that the estimate is 83 to 124k. We probably reckon it's about 100, 105,000 in its current state, in the current market, with the interest rates where they are. So that's still sort of doubled in equity. But the big thing is the cash flow. So we rent the cafe out for £600 a month, and the flat's at £450 right now. So that's £1,050 a month out of what effectively was a £50,000 purchase. So again, if you think about the cash flow on that, even at a 7-8% interest rate, that is a huge amount of return on that. By the way, if you want to find out a bit more about how I source, buy, and structure my property deals, I'm going to run an actual training on this rather than a YouTube video, a sort of gated training next week, next Thursday. I've not put a page up to sign up. It'll be free, but it'll be a more in-depth training on the systems that I use to do this. If you want to do that, number one, put a thumbs up right now. And if you put a thumbs up, I will put a link in the community tab, probably beginning of next week, for you to sign up to that training. Okay, so third thing that I think people should be looking for in 2024 are portfolios. Just to come back to this, I said at the beginning, don't go for single lets. And one of the main reasons for that is it's very difficult, not impossible, but more difficult to find them and buy them at a price point and force the value appreciation on a single let in the current market when we don't have any market taking us up. we've got higher interest rates. There's one exception to that, and that's if you can buy portfolios. And there are specific types of portfolios that I want you to be looking at. And number one of the biggest sellers in the current market are distressed baby boomer, not even distressed, baby boomer landlords who are exiting. They've taken their equity, they've had their passive gains, and they believe it's time to now sell up, release that equity. They can't be bothered with it anymore for all of the issues that I talk about regularly, which is things like increased regulation, increased legislation, interest rates going up, it's just getting more difficult to invest in the residential property market. So there's a lot of portfolios out there on the market. Now, I want to very, very briefly run you through a strategy I use called balance sheet hacking. And I'm going to demonstrate it on this property, which I bought 2 years ago. But look at this property as a little portfolio. But you can do this on anything that sits in a limited company that effectively has a load of equity in it, okay? And the vendor, the seller, portfolio landlord is looking to sell the limited company rather than the individual elements. So I call this balance sheet hacking as a strategy to acquire, but effectively think of it as like a wholesale to retail methodology to buy something super cheap, get a big discount when you buy it, and then you've got things that are worth a lot more, when they're combined together. So to demonstrate the principle, this is a business. This is a property I bought in 2021, again in the middle of Chester. We have very similar to the other one actually that I showed you. We have retail down here. It's a hairdresser's. And then we've actually got, you can't see it, there's another one in the roof. We've actually got 5 flats. We've got two on that floor, 2 on that floor, 1 in the roof space there. So there's actually 6 units over the whole building, middle of Chester within the walls. Now, this was a sale by a limited company where one of the shareholders had very sadly passed away, and the other shareholders thought it was time to sell the property. But they wanted to sell the company rather than the property for tax reasons. Now, to talk about this very simply, and I want to give this a very high level overview, when you sell a company with a property in it, that company is going to have a tax liability on it if the property value has gone up, or the property in it or properties in it have gone up in value. So let's say, for example, they bought the property for 100,000 and they were selling it for $1 million, or selling the company for $1 million with the property worth $1 million inside it. There's a £900,000 value increase there. That's going to create a huge capital gain within the company, right? If they were to sell the property, not the company, right? So to get rid of that, they can sell the company. And then that capital gain sits as an unrealized gain on the company balance sheet. Let's just say, for example, the unrealized gain was 200 grand's worth of corporation tax liability. I know the figures don't add up. Let's just say that's the case, that it's 200 grand's worth of corporation tax liability. I'm not going to buy it for $1 million because I'm buying a corporation tax liability, right? That's not fair for me to take that liability. They've benefited from it. So what we do is we buy the limited company for the value of the property inside it or properties inside it minus that balance sheet item, which is the unrealized gain. The corporation tax due on the unrealized gain. So it's a liability, basically sits on the balance sheet. So if that was 200 grand corporation tax liability and the building's worth $1 million, you'd buy the company for 800 grand. Now, you'd buy the company with 800 grand, but you'd still have that liability on the balance sheet, right? So when you come to sell the property, let's say the company then sells the property for $1 million, you've got to pay that 200 grand corporation tax liability. I hope that makes sense. I'm not sure if I explained it very well, but effectively, if you don't plan on selling the property, it's a fantastic mechanism for buying properties that are in a limited company by buying the limited company for the value of the properties minus the corporation tax liability that's sitting there for the capital gain. Okay, and that's exactly what we did on this one. And if I show you my completion statement to buy the actual company itself, you can see here, that's what we bought the company for. So 259,000. There was basically a seller's director's loan in which we paid off, and then that became my seller's loan. So effectively, we're in for 280k. Okay, 280,000 to buy what was 6 units in the middle of Chester. You can also see, by the way, stamp duty was very low, £1,300 worth of stamp duty, because you're paying 0.5% on the shares of the company rather than the property itself. And that 280,000 on the same day as buying it, I had the property revalued, and it was revalued at 435,000 on the same day. So we bought the company for 280. Yes, there's a capital gains tax liability on the balance sheet, but the property is worth 435, and then we refinanced on the same day. So we bought it in cash, refinanced on the same day to effectively leave only 35,000 in. And then we've got 6 units which are cash flowing at a very, very positive rate on that. So that's the third way that I would recommend you look at buying properties in 2024. Oh, sorry, I just kicked my camera. Just to recap on that, 3 things that I would avoid. Single lets, really difficult to work in the current interest rate environment, difficult to add and force that value appreciation. Flips, for me, way too much risk involved in flipping right now. I'm not saying you can't make money, but they could well sit on the market for months with you not being able to sell them for the price you want. And if you've got any leverage in there, that's going to erode your profit margins to the point where you could be underwater. And the third thing that I would avoid are non-specific service accommodation units, because I feel we're hitting a saturation point when I look at the data in Air DNA, and therefore non-specific, which are just general units sitting at the bottom of the pile, will be more difficult to rent out than bespoke, high-end accommodation units at the top of the pile. That's the 3 things I would avoid. The 3 things I'll be looking at doing are buying unicorns, buying sparkles, and buying portfolios using balance sheet hacking. I hope that was useful. Give me a thumbs up if you thought that was useful to go through. I'm going to go through. Oh, we barely had any comments at all. I think everybody's probably been just watching. So if that was useful, give me a thumbs up. If you'd like to jump on a training next Thursday, where I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail and step-by-step process, it'll be off YouTube because I just find the technical things don't go down that well on YouTube. So we'll just have a private Zoom meeting where you guys can come on. Southwell Pianos, I have a farmhouse with acre, cottage shop, 300k down from 500k. Sounds nice. Deceased estate, sorry to hear about that. The deceased estate, shop is demolished, leaving a house and cottage. Do I go full reno or rewire, etc., leaving buyer to finish? I think that's a very specific question, Southwell, that I'd need to know a bit more context around it from there. Generally, what I tend to do is do full renovations rather than kind of leave things half done for somebody else to finish off. So yeah, I'd probably, on the very limited amount, because I don't know what you're planning on doing it. Are you sort of flipping it on? I would probably go full hog, or you could just separate them off and sell them for somebody else to do. It all depends on the figures. Ultimately, we've got to appraise that deal. That's generally what I do with my clients on the Property Cashflow Accelerator. Sort of go deep, look at all the options and what the scenario is. Green just joining. Yeah, watch the replay. Hopefully you pick up something, Green. Good to see you, Darren. Let me just put on this. My concerns, questions on the unicorn: business rate cost during the refurb, unoccupied terms for rentals, risky commercial tenant delinquency. Let me answer all of those for you, because they're all very good questions. Business rates cost during a refurb. Depending what you're doing, we can get rid of business rates. So generally, I've always got rid of the business rates on that. This is, I don't want to go too much into the complexities of it right now, because it's not just as simple as saying do X, Y, and Z, and it's going to get rid of the business rates. You need to understand the system. But if a unit is not in a commercially viable state to reinstate, you'll be able to get the business rates nullified. If you are going change of use, so like commercial conversion, when you get the change of use, they'll be nullified when you start the project. The other thing, and this is something that I looked for, is grade 2 listed properties. You do not pay the business rates on as well. So that one I showed you is actually grade 2 listed frontage. So there's no business rates payable on it. So that's the business rates. But if you are going to have to pay business rates, it is a cost of holding that you need to put into your figures. So I would always, and by the way, anything that is a challenge becomes a negotiation point when you're buying, for exactly those reasons. Because if that's a concern for you buying it, imagine what it's like for the person holding it, who might be in a distressed sale position or a cash flow barrier situation, and is having to pay those things themselves. So you need to build it into your model when you appraise that. On occupied terms for rentals, again, exactly the same. So when I buy a commercial, I base it on, depending where it is, but I work into my figures it's going to be empty for 12 months. I know that sounds a lot, but I reckon I work on a 12-month vacant period, and anything better than that is a bonus for me. So when I'm working out those figures. So that one in Chester, for example, which we bought in July of this year, 2023, We got heads of terms secured. Well, we had heads of terms with a tenant secured in November, but then we had somebody else come and actually beat it. So we switched and went to a slightly better offer in December, which heads of terms were issued for before Christmas, and they'll be entering that tenancy in Jan. So that's July to Jan. So what's that? 6-7 months. And in that time, we've had to strip it out. So we spent about, I think, £15,000 stripping it out and white boxing it. But it's a 10-year lease when they're in. And again, I don't want to go into valuation methodology here, but you're buying at a value, right, that reflects the emptiness of it. So you're not buying, if you were to buy a commercial unit with a tenant in, you're going to be paying full market value. The reason I could buy a property like I just showed you for 345,000 is there is an issue with the owner getting a commercial tenant in. And so therefore, as a vacant unit, it's worth way less than if it's got a tenant in it. The moment you get a tenant in, they sign a lease with a decent covenant, the value multipliers are going to kick in, and you're going to add a huge amount of value to the property without doing very much work at all, which is why I love the strategy. And then you've got risky commercial tenant delinquency is also another risk. Here is why I love commercial. And again, I know it sounds like I'm turning around all the objections to things that are really good, but that's what I want to do. There is no difference to saying that to saying put in a residential tenant in a house on an AST, okay? And you can credit check them all you want, but their position can change very quickly. And if they can't pay the rent, it's very, very difficult to then get a tenant out very quickly. Generically, and speaking from experience, when a residential tenant stops paying, it can take 6 to 9, maybe even 12 months from the day they stop paying to actually getting them removed from that property if they dig their heels in and use all the legal mechanisms they have available to them to use, which is basically not move anywhere until the bailiffs come and take them out. That could take up to a year after they stop paying the rent. In the meantime, they're probably going to be trashing the property. And so there's many a horror story where you have tenants leaving with thousands, if not tens of thousands of arrears, but thousands, if not tens of thousands of damage as well. And there ain't nothing you can do about it as a landlord. Very difficult to pursue people for that. Commercial is extremely different. The moment they stop paying their rent, you can go ahead and change the locks, right? And you can seize their assets to cover the rents, and you have much stronger rights in terms of deposits. So for example, on this one in Chester, we take 3 months up front as a deposit, so it'll be £6,000 deposit up front. They'll be spending almost £100,000 fitting out that unit. So let's say they spend £100,000. It's a sushi place, by the way. It's a sushi franchise. If they spend £100,000 fitting it out, and in a year's time they go bust, right? That fit out will stay in that unit. We'll have their deposit, and we can get rid of them within a few weeks of them effectively going under, right? We can just go in and seize whatever. So it's quite different. I've actually just, to be totally transparent, I've just had to do this on a unit that we have, that exactly that. We had a tenant fall into issues, stop paying the rent. He's racked up 6 months worth of arrears, but because the lease actually comes with a personal guarantee. I tend to get director personal guarantees on leases through limited companies. After basically moving out, he has paid that, and we've waited until we've got a new tenant lined up. So he stays in tenancy, he stays in his lease, and he's been asking to break the lease because obviously when he's in the lease, he's liable for the rates, he's liable for the utilities. We've kept him in the lease until we found a new tenant. We've got a new tenant. He's then paid the arrears 100% to break the lease and get rid of the liability. Plus, we've kept all of the assets, tables, chairs, cooking equipment that are in there. So I know that sounds quite objective and a little bit cutthroat, but that is the world of commercial. So I'm not sure if that answers. Oh, sorry, I'm making weird things on that. I don't know if that answers your question, Darren, or sort of gives some food for thought. Regreen, when's the course starting? Regreen. So what we're doing next week is it's going to be a free training, and this will be a prelude to me launching the Property Unicorn Club, which we'll be doing in a couple of weeks' time, which I'm really excited to tell everybody about, but I'm keeping it slightly under wraps what it's going to be. But I've decided I'm not going to be doing digital courses anymore, like standalone things and selling them, right? I have my year-long Property Cashflow Accelerator. That's where I coach my clients on a year-long mentorship. But I'm going to be launching the Property Unicorn Club, which is going to be a community with constant training engagement and all of that sort of stuff. So I'm looking forward to sharing that. Green, interesting. The fit out isn't the property of the tenant. It is the property of the tenant. So it depends what the fit out is. So if it's integral, okay, then that's going to stay there. It's going to be very difficult for an administrator to come in and start taking that. Obviously, it's tables, chairs, stuff like that. Yes, if they go under and go into liquidation, an administrator will probably look to get those. But I generally find the sort of things that we do. With commercial, I look for things between 1,200 square foot and 2,500 square foot. Anything above that becomes quite different type of tenants. I like to be below that, have much more flexible tenant terms, and also attract tenants who then get small business rate relief. So it's much easier for them to get in and out of units rather than big tenancies with very onerous leases, which I think is why a lot of commercial units stand empty, because you've got a lot of big commercial landlords are funds, right? They're pension funds, they're REITs, real estate investment trusts. They don't care because they've got such a lot of it. If some of it sits empty, they'll have it sit empty for months, if not years, waiting for the right tenant. As a property entrepreneur, I look at it in a different way. I like to have smaller units, more flexibility, get tenants in, support them and their business growth. If they go under, it's unlikely they're going to go through big administrations or liquidations or things like that. They're generally smaller style businesses. There we go. Hopefully that was useful. Lovely. All right, team. I hope that was useful. It's 5:15 already. So I will put a link for the webinar next week, which will be off YouTube. I'll put it on the community probably beginning of next week. If you want to get on the mailing list, by the way, so I'll be putting out to the database as well, feel free just to download the white paper, which kind of talks a little bit about property unicorns, robstewartglobal.com/white-paper. That'll get you on my email list, so you can get a link to that training next week as well, which will be totally free. And I'll talk to you a bit more about the Property Unicorn Club as and when we we launch it. Peter says, how do I keep slim? That's an interesting question, Peter. How do I keep slim? So I have a personal trainer, and he's pretty hot on making me consume less than I expend in terms of energy, and lifting lots of weights four times a week. So that's pretty much how I keep slim. Luckily, I have a business which is very hands-free, so it allows me the time to do it, and that is one of the beauties of having a property business. I know you always hear the marketing messages of financial freedom and all of that sort of stuff, and it's easy to go they're all a load of BS, but actually it's when you have a property portfolio, it does give you that freedom, that control, that choice to be able to live life in long term. So if I was in a full-time job, I would probably struggle to keep slim, especially over the Christmas period. But yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, Peter. Okay, team, I'm going to sign off. I hope that was useful. Everybody have a fantastic new year. One of the reasons to do this now is this is the last one before we go into 2024. So I'll see you next week, where we'll talk about the inevitable barrage of news and media as we go into the new year, talking about what's going on in the property market, what's going on with interest rates. We'll rejoin that narrative next week. But for now, let's just not worry about it. Enjoy the new year. Think strategically. Everybody who is here, you're probably, of a mind of wanting to get into property investment or property entrepreneurship. Now is the time to be thinking strategically about what you want to achieve over 2024 to actually get shit done, rather than just have those sort of dreams and aspirations but never do anything. That's the biggest differentiator with success, by the way, is having a plan and following it. So have some strategic thinking. That's what all my clients are up to this week. And I'll see you next week. Have a great one.